The journey to the extraction point took 2 days. Varketh led the way, his massive form moving through the forest with a grace that seemed impossible for something so large. Taemin followed, his wounds bandaged with supplies from Varketh's pack and his mind full of questions he didn't dare ask. On the second night, they made camp in a clearing marked by ancient stones. Varketh started a fire with casual efficiency, and they sat across from each other in silence. The flames cast shadows across the Huntmaster's scarred face. "You want to know why I helped you?" Varketh said finally. "It wasn't a question." "Yes," Taemin admitted, "because I have watched many species attempt these trials. Most rely on strength or technology. They bring weapons and armor and they survive through force." The Krygoth poked at the fire with a stick. "But survival is not the same as hunting. A prey animal survives by running, by hiding. A predator survives by adapting, by learning, by becoming better than what hunts it." "And which am I?" Taemin asked. "Both," Varketh said. "You move like prey, careful, quiet, aware of everything around you. But you think like a predator. You set traps. You use the environment as a weapon. When cornered, you attack instead of surrendering." He looked up from the fire. "You are what humans were before they became soft, before they forgot how to hunt." Taemin thought about his grandfather, about the old ways that most of Earth had abandoned. "My people think strength means never needing to struggle. They think technology and civilization have made us beyond such things." "They are fools," Varketh said bluntly. "Every species that forgets how to struggle becomes prey for those who remember. Your ancestors conquered a world filled with creatures larger and stronger than themselves. They did it with cunning and persistence and refusal to give up. That is strength. That is what makes a predator." They sat in silence for a while. Then Varketh spoke again. "The trials continue when you return to the station. There will be an arena. Combat challenges. Raskathar will be there. He will challenge you." "I can't beat him," Taemin said. "He's 3 times my size. Size means nothing if the mind is slow. Speed means nothing if the spirit is weak." Varketh leaned forward. "Listen to me, brother. The prey survives by running. The predator survives by adapting. You cannot match Raskathar's strength, so do not try. Make him match your adaptation instead." "I don't understand." "You will." Varketh stood up. "We reach the extraction point tomorrow. After that, I cannot help you directly. The rules of the trials forbid it. But I have given you what you need. Use it." The next day, they reached the extraction point just as the sun rose. A transport ship was already there, along with several other participants who had survived the forest. They all stared as Taemin emerged from the trees with Varketh at his side. On Taemin's face, drawn in ash and blood according to ancient tradition, were the marks of the Karveth. The bond marks of a Krygoth hunt brother. The transport ride back to the Conclave station was silent. The other participants kept their distance from Taemin, whispering among themselves but saying nothing directly to him. When the ship docked and the doors opened, he could see a crowd waiting in the hangar bay. Ambassador Hyunwoo pushed through the crowd. "Taemin! We received reports that you were disqualified, that you abandoned your route to help a civilian. What were you thinking?" "I was thinking she needed help," Taemin said tiredly. "You threw away your trial. You embarrassed Earth in front of the entire conclave." "He embarrassed nothing." Varketh's voice cut through the hangar like a blade. The crowd fell silent. The Huntmaster stepped forward, towering over everyone present. "This human fought death in my forest. He saved a life at cost to himself. He earned my respect. He earned the marks of Karveth. Any who question his worth question me." Hyunwoo's face went pale. Around them, the other delegates began murmuring. The ritual marks on Taemin's face were unmistakable, and everyone knew what they meant. A Krygoth Huntmaster did not give such honor lightly. I didn't realize," Hyunwoo stammered. "Of course you didn't," Varketh said coldly. "You see only weakness because you have forgotten strength. Your people have forgotten what they were." The Huntmaster turned and walked away, leaving Taemin standing alone in front of the crowd. Someone started to clap, then another. Within moments, the entire hangar was applauding. Taemin stood there, overwhelmed and exhausted, wondering what had just happened. 3 days later, the arena matches began. The combat arena was a massive circular space with seats rising up on all sides. Thousands of delegates from across the galaxy filled the stands, come to watch the final phase of the Trials of Worth. The rules were simple. Champions from each species would face challengers, Victory brought honor. Defeat brought shame. Taemin sat in the preparation area trying to calm his racing heart. His wounds from the forest had healed enough to fight, but he was still far from his best. Around him, other champions prepared their weapons and armor. They all looked confident and ready. He looked terrified. "Taemin of Earth," the announcer's voice echoed across the arena. "You have been challenged by Raskthar of the Warlord clan." The crowd roared. Taemin stood on shaking legs and walked toward the arena entrance. As he passed the viewing area, he caught sight of Sora in the stands. Her ankle was in a medical brace, but she was smiling at him. She mouthed 2 words. "Thank you." Taemin stepped into the arena. The roar of the crowd washed over him like a physical force. On the opposite side, Raskthar emerged, his massive form drawing cheers from the Krigoth sections. He was armed with traditional Krigoth weapons, bladed gloves that extended his already formidable claws. 3 rounds, the referee announced. Traditional weapons only. Victory by submission or incapacitation. "Begin!" Raskthar charged immediately. Taemin barely had time to dodge. The Krigoth's claws whistled past his face, close enough that he felt the air move. Raskthar spun and attacked again, driving Taemin back across the arena floor. "Is this what Earth sends?" Raskthar called out to the crowd. "This trembling child?" He lunged again, and this time his claws caught Taemin's shoulder, drawing blood. "Where is the warrior spirit your people boast about? Where is the strength?" Taemin rolled away, but Raskthar was relentless. The Krigoth warrior was playing to the crowd, making a show of his dominance. Every hit was designed to humiliate rather than to finish quickly. "You should have stayed in your forest, little human," Raskthar said, grabbing Taemin and lifting him off the ground. "You should have died there where no one would have to watch your shame." He threw Taemin across the arena. The impact drove the air from Taemin's lungs. The crowd was on its feet now, cheering or jeering, depending on their species. Raskthar walked toward him slowly, savoring the moment. Taemin's vision blurred. Everything hurt. He could barely breathe. Raskthar was right. He was going to lose. He was going to prove everyone right about him. Then he heard Varketh's voice in his memory. "Let them think you are prey, then become the predator." Taemin stopped trying to match Raskthar's strength, stopped trying to fight like a Krigoth. Instead, he remembered the forest. He remembered the traps in the ambush. He remembered that prey animals survived by making predators come to them on their terms. When Raskthar charged again, Taemin didn't dodge away. He dodged forward inside the Krigoth's guard. His smaller size was an advantage here. He struck at Raskthar's knee with his elbow, not hard enough to damage, but enough to make the larger warrior stumble. Raskthar roared in anger and spun. But Taemin was already moving, staying close where those long arms couldn't get full extension. He struck again, quick jabs to nerve clusters his grandfather had taught him about. "Not to hurt, to distract. Stand still and fight," Raskthar demanded. But Taemin didn't. He circled and weaved, making Raskthar work for every attack. The Krigoth was strong, but he was also heavy. Taemin was learning his patterns, seeing the tells before each strike. The first round ended with Raskthar ahead on points, but breathing hard. Taemin had been walking for 3 hours when he heard the howling. It wasn't the sound of wind or some distant predator. It was closer. Multiple voices rising and falling in a pattern that made the hair on his neck stand up. Hunting calls. Sora stirred on his back. "What is that?" "I don't know." Taemin kept walking, but his pace quickened. "How much farther to the research station?" "Maybe 6 kilometers, maybe less." Her voice was weak. The journey was taking its toll on her. The howling came again, closer this time. Taemin could hear movement in the brush now, things pacing them through the trees. He caught glimpses of gray fur and gleaming eyes. Pack hunters. His grandfather had told him stories about wolves on Earth, how they worked together to bring down prey much larger than themselves. "They're called shrikehounds," Sora whispered. "They hunt in packs of 6 to 10. Fast, smart, and they don't give up once they've picked a target." "How do I fight them?" "You don't, you run." Taemin looked ahead. The forest stretched endlessly in every direction with no shelter in sight. He couldn't outrun them, not while carrying Sora. And if he set her down to fight, the pack would just circle around and attack her while he was distracted. "Hold on tight," he said. He started running. The pack howled in response, the sound shifting from hunting calls to attack cries. Taemin could hear them crashing through the undergrowth behind him, closing the distance. His lungs burned and his legs felt like they might give out at any moment. Sora's weight pressed down on his shoulders, making every step harder. A shrikehound burst from the trees on his left, all teeth and claws and matted gray fur. Taman dodged right, narrowly avoiding its snapping jaws. Another appeared on his right, forcing him back to the left. They were hurting him, driving him toward something. Then he saw it. A clearing ahead with no cover and nowhere to run. Perfect killing ground. Taman slid to a stop at the edge of the clearing. The pack emerged from the trees in a semicircle, cutting off any retreat. There were 8 of them, each one built like a lean wolf but with oversized heads and jaws that could probably crush bone. They moved with an intelligence that was terrifying, positioning themselves strategically, cutting off escape routes. The pack leader stepped forward. It was larger than the others, with scars across its snout and cold yellow eyes that studied Taman like he was already dead. "Listen to me," Taman said quietly to Sora. "When I say run, you run. Straight through that gap in the trees on the far side of the clearing. Don't look back, don't stop, just run." "I can't run," Sora said. "My ankle." "You'll crawl then. You'll do whatever it takes, but you're going to survive this." He reached back and cut the vines holding her to his back. She slid to the ground with a cry of pain. "What are you doing?" "Giving you a chance." Taman pulled out his utility knife with one hand and grabbed a thick branch from the ground with the other. "Run!" Sora looked at him, tears streaming down her face. Then she started dragging herself toward the gap in the trees, using her arms to pull her body along the ground. The pack's attention shifted toward her immediately. Taman roared and charged the nearest shrikehound. The move surprised them. Prey wasn't supposed to attack. Prey was supposed to run. Taman drove his branch into the surprised creature's face, then slashed with his knife as it recoiled. The blade found flesh and the shrikehound yelped, backing away. But now the rest of the pack was moving. They came at him from all sides, a coordinated assault designed to overwhelm and drag down. Taman spun and slashed, kicked and dodged. He felt teeth close on his arm and barely managed to pull free. Claws raked across his ribs. He stabbed blindly and felt his knife sink into something soft. The pack leader hit him from behind, driving him to the ground. The impact knocked the air from his lungs. Taman rolled and kicked, trying to get space, but the pack was too close now. This was it. This was how he died. Then something massive crashed into the clearing. Varketh moved like violence given form. His claws, each as long as Taman's fingers, tore through the first shrikehound before it even knew he was there. He caught the second by its throat and threw it 20 feet into a tree where it hit with a sickening crack. The pack leader tried to attack, but Varketh was faster. He grabbed it by the head and twisted. The remaining shrikehound scattered, fleeing into the forest with yelps of terror. The entire fight had lasted maybe 15 seconds. Silence fell over the clearing. Taman lay on his back, bleeding from a dozen wounds, staring up at the Krygoth who towered above him. Varketh looked down, his yellow eyes unreadable. "Can you stand?" the Huntmaster asked. His voice was deep and rough, like gravel grinding together. Taman tried to speak, but his throat was too dry. He nodded and forced himself to his feet, swaying slightly. Every part of his body screamed in pain. "The female?" Varketh asked. Taman looked toward the trees where Sora had disappeared. "She was crawling that way. She's injured." Varketh made a sound that might have been approval or disgust. Taman couldn't tell. The Krygoth walked to the edge of the clearing and called out in a language Taman didn't understand. A moment later, Sora's voice answered weakly. "She lives," Varketh said. "She made it far enough. Others of her kind will find her soon." He turned back to Taman. "You sacrificed yourself for her. Why?" "She needed help," Taman said, the same answer he had given Sora. "You were already dying when I arrived. The pack had you. You knew this, yet you attacked them to give her time to escape." "Yes." Varketh circled him slowly, studying him like a puzzle to be solved. "You fight like one who has nothing to lose but honor to gain. You do not fight like your kind usually fights, all desperation and no technique." "I fight like my grandfather taught me," Taman said. His legs were threatening to give out. "Like humans fought before we went to the stars. With whatever we have." The Krygoth stopped circling. "Your people have forgotten what they were, but you remember?" He paused, then asked, "Why did you save the female? You could have abandoned her, reached your extraction point, passed your trial." "Because she needed help and I could give it," Taman repeated. He was so tired. Everything hurt. "What other reason do I need?" For a long moment, Varketh said nothing. Then he spoke, and his voice was different somehow, softer. I had a brother once. Younger than me, smaller, always getting into trouble. We were hunting in the deep caves when a tunnel collapsed. I was trapped beneath the rocks. He could have escaped, should have escaped. The ceiling was still falling and staying meant certain death. Taemin waited. He stayed. He dug me out with his bare hands even as the rocks fell around us. He pushed me toward the exit and told me to run. I did. I ran like a coward and I lived. Varketh's claws flexed at his sides. He did not. The tunnel came down before he could escape. I'm sorry, Taemin said quietly. Do not be sorry. Be proud. You did what my brother did. You valued another's life above your own success, your own survival. Strength without compassion is savagery. Your species claims to value both, but I have seen little proof, until now. The Huntmaster turned to face him fully. What is your name, human? Taemin. Taemin, Varketh repeated as if testing the sound of it. I am Varketh, Huntmaster of the Krigoth clans, and I believe you are worthy of something rare. The Krigoth pulled a blade from his belt, a wicked curved thing that gleamed in the sunlight. Taemin tensed, but Varketh held the knife out handle first. Among my people, Varketh said, those who hunt death together may become Karveth. Bonded brothers. It is an old tradition, one rarely offered to outsiders, never in my lifetime to a human. Taemin stared at the offered blade. You are small, Varketh continued. You are weak by our standards, but your spirit hunts like mine. You face death without flinching. You protect the helpless at cost to yourself. These are the marks of a true hunter. He cut his palm with the blade, dark blood welling up. Then he offered the knife to Taemin. If you accept, we are brothers. My honor becomes yours. My enemies become yours. And your struggles become mine. Yellow eyes met human brown. Choose. Taemin's hand was shaking as he took the knife. He cut his palm, wincing at the sting. Varketh clasped his hand, their blood mixing. Karveth, the Huntmaster said solemnly. Brothers, Taemin whispered. 3 days into the trial, Taemin had fallen into a rhythm. Wake before dawn, travel while the forest was cool, find shelter before the temperature dropped again. His wounds from the first night were healing slowly, though they ached when he moved. He had learned which plants were safe to touch and which ones left burning rashes on his skin. He had learned that the small silver birds always fled before larger predators arrived, giving him precious seconds of warning. The forest was teaching him, and he was learning to listen. On the afternoon of the third day, the sky began to change. The purple tint deepened to an angry dark blue, and the wind picked up, sending leaves and branches skittering across the ground. Taemin looked up through the canopy and felt his stomach drop. Massive clouds were rolling in from the west, black and swollen with rain. He needed shelter, and he needed it fast. Taemin started running, searching for anything that could protect him from what was coming. A cave, an overhang, anything solid? The wind grew stronger, bending the trees and howling through the branches. The temperature began to plummet. That was when he heard the scream. It was human, female. Coming from somewhere off to his left, away from the direction he had been traveling. Taemin hesitated for only a moment. Then he changed direction and ran toward the sound. He found her lying at the bottom of a steep slope, her leg twisted at a wrong angle. She was young, maybe his age, with short black hair and a research uniform rather than trial gear. Blood ran down the side of her face from a gash above her eyebrow. Please, she gasped when she saw him. Help me. I can't walk. The first drops of rain began to fall, cold and heavy. Taemin slid down the slope and knelt beside her. What happened? Who are you? Sora, she managed through clenched teeth. I'm with the research team. I was collecting samples outside the trial zone when the slope gave way. My emergency beacon isn't working. The rain was falling harder now, turning into a downpour within seconds. Thunder cracked overhead so loud it shook the ground. Can you move at all? Taemin asked. My ankle is broken, Sora said. Maybe worse. I tried to climb back up, but I can't put weight on it. Taemin looked around desperately. They were in a gully, the worst possible place to be during a storm. Water was already beginning to pool at the bottom. If the rain continued, this whole area would flood. I'm going to lift you, he said. It's going to hurt. Wait, Sora grabbed his arm. You're in the trial. If you help me, if you deviate from your route to the extraction point, they'll disqualify you. Lightning split the sky, followed immediately by thunder. The storm was right on top of them. I don't care, Taman said, and he meant it. He got his arms under her shoulders and knees and lifted. She screamed as her broken ankle shifted, but he kept moving. She was heavier than he expected, or maybe he was weaker than he thought. His wounded back protested immediately, the healing cuts threatening to tear open again. He climbed. The slope was slick with mud and rain, and every step was a battle. Water ran down his face, blinding him. Sora whimpered in pain with each jarring movement. Taman's legs burned and his arms trembled, but he kept climbing. They reached the top just as the gully below began to fill with rushing water. There, Sora pointed with a shaking hand. Through the rain, Taman could barely make out a rock formation about 50 meters away. He staggered toward it, his boots slipping in the mud. The shelter was little more than an overhanging rock, but it was dry and protected from the wind. Taman laid Sora down as gently as he could and collapsed beside her, gasping for air. His entire body was shaking from exhaustion. "Thank you," Sora whispered. "You didn't have to do that." "Yes, I did," Taman said simply. He forced himself to sit up and assess their situation. It wasn't good. Sora needed medical attention. Her ankle was badly broken and she might have a concussion. The storm showed no signs of stopping, and he had used most of his energy getting them here. Taman pulled out his thermal blanket and wrapped it around Sora. Then he started gathering what dry wood he could find at the back of the shelter, along with dried moss that might catch a spark. His fingers were numb from the cold, making everything harder. "What are you doing?" Sora asked through chattering teeth. "Making a fire. We need warmth or hypothermia will kill us before anything else does." It took him almost 30 minutes to get a fire started with his knife and a piece of flint from his survival kit. The flames were small and weak, but they were there. He fed the fire carefully, nursing it until it was strong enough to provide real heat. The night that followed was long and miserable. The storm raged outside their shelter, bringing with it a cold that seeped into their bones. Sora drifted in and out of consciousness, mumbling about her research and calling for someone named Jiho. Taman stayed awake, feeding the fire and making sure she didn't go into shock. At some point during the endless night, he heard something moving outside the shelter. Through the rain and darkness, he caught a glimpse of a large shape, reptilian and unmistakable. The Krygoth Watcher was out there again, observing. Taman was too tired to care. If it wanted to attack, let it come. He would fight with whatever strength he had left. But the Watcher didn't attack. It simply stood in the rain for a long moment, then disappeared back into the storm. Dawn brought a break in the weather. The rain had stopped, though water still dripped from every surface. Taman added the last of his firewood to the dying flames and checked on Sora. Her fever had broken during the night, and her breathing was steady. That was good. Her ankle was swollen and purple. That was bad. "Hey," she said softly, opening her eyes. "You're still here? Where else would I go?" Taman tried to smile. Sora looked at him properly for the first time. "You look terrible. You should see the other guy." She laughed weakly, then winced at the pain it caused. "The research station is about 10 kilometers north of here. If you can get me there, they can help. But that means you'll never make it to your extraction point on time." Taman was already packing up their camp. "The trial doesn't matter. It matters to you," Sora said. "I saw your face. You're the one they've been talking about. The young one. The one everyone thinks will fail. Yeah, well, they're probably right. Then why help me? Why throw it all away?" Taman paused in his packing. He thought about his grandfather, about the lessons learned on a farm under Earth's sun. He thought about what it meant to be human, really human, not just a warrior or a diplomat, but something more fundamental. "Because you needed help," he said finally, "and I could give it. That's enough reason." He got Sora onto his back, fashioning a makeshift carrier from vines and branches. The weight made his legs shake, but he started walking north. Behind them, hidden in the trees, Varketh watched the young human carry his burden through the forest. The Huntmaster had seen many acts of courage in his long life. He had seen warriors face death without fear, had seen champions overcome impossible odds. But this was something different. This small human had sacrificed his own trial, his own honor in the eyes of his people to save someone he didn't even know. Varketh thought of his own brother, lost so many years ago. He thought of the choice his brother had made, to stay and die rather than abandon Varketh to the collapsing tunnel. Strength without compassion is savagery, the old word said. This human understood that, even if he didn't know he did. The huntmaster made a decision. He began following the young human, keeping pace through the trees. Not to observe, to protect. Something worthy had entered his forest, and Varketh would ensure it survived to leave again. The transport ship dropped Taman at the edge of the forest, just as the twin suns began their climb above the horizon. The moment his boots hit the ground, the ship lifted off again, leaving him in a clearing surrounded by trees that stretched up toward the purple-tinted sky. The air was thick and humid, carrying smells he couldn't identify. Somewhere in the distance, something howled. Tamin adjusted the pack on his shoulders and looked around. Other participants had been dropped at different points around the forest. He had seen them loading into separate transports. Krygoth warriors with their heavy weapons, Vethrani scouts with their advanced scanning equipment, and representatives from a dozen other species. Each one looked prepared and confident. Each one looked like they belonged here. He was alone. The rules were simple. Survive for 7 days in the death forests of Terminus Prime. Reach the extraction point on the far side. The emergency beacon would bring rescue if things went wrong, but using it meant failure and disqualification. More importantly, it meant proving everyone right about him. Taman started walking. The forest floor was covered in a thick moss that muffled his footsteps. Massive trees with silver bark rose all around him, their branches forming a canopy that filtered the sunlight into dancing patterns. Beautiful, he thought, and probably deadly. His grandfather had taught him that nature didn't care about fair fights. The prettiest flowers were often the most poisonous. The quietest predators were the most dangerous. Watch everything, the old man had said. The birds, the insects, the way the wind moves. They'll tell you what's wrong before you see it yourself. Taman watched. He noticed how certain areas of moss were darker than others. He saw scratch marks on tree bark, too high to be from anything small. He spotted tracks in the soft earth near a stream, 3-toed prints as long as his forearm. Everything was information. Everything was a lesson. By midday, he had found water and filled his canteen. He marked trees as he walked, leaving signs he could follow back if needed. The temperature was rising and sweat soaked through his uniform. He could hear sounds all around him now, rustling in the undergrowth, movement in the branches above. Things were watching him. As the suns began to descend, Taman started looking for a place to shelter. He found a cluster of rocks that formed a natural alcove with a clear view of the surrounding area. It wasn't perfect, but it would do. He gathered branches and vines, building a basic shelter against the rock face. Then he started setting traps. His grandfather's lessons came back to him. Simple snares made from vines positioned on game trails, noisemakers hung from branches, stones balanced carefully so they would fall and clatter if something passed beneath them. Nothing sophisticated, but he didn't need sophisticated. He just needed warning. Darkness fell quickly on Terminus Prime. The temperature dropped with shocking speed, going from uncomfortably hot to bone-chilling cold in less than an hour. Taman wrapped himself in his thermal blanket and huddled in his shelter, watching the forest transform. Bioluminescent plants began to glow, casting an eerie blue-green light across the landscape. The sounds changed too. The daytime creatures went silent, replaced by deeper, more threatening noises. Growls, clicking, the sound of something large moving through the brush. And then Taman felt it, the sensation of being watched. He scanned the darkness, trying to see what was out there. His heart pounded in his chest. One of his noise traps rattled suddenly off to his left. Something was circling his camp. The attack came from the right. A creature burst from the darkness, all teeth and claws and matted fur. It was built like a bear but moved like a cat, fast and silent despite its size. Taman rolled aside as it crashed into his shelter, scattering branches everywhere. He grabbed a sharpened stick he had prepared and scrambled backward. The creature turned toward him, its eyes reflecting the bioluminescent glow. It was massive, easily 3 times his size. Saliva dripped from its jaws. It lowered its head and charged. Taman didn't run. Running would trigger its chase instinct, and it was faster than him. Instead, he dove to the side and toward one of his traps. The creature followed faster than he expected. Its claws raked across his back, tearing through his uniform and drawing blood. Pain exploded across his shoulders, but Taman kept moving. He reached the trap, a carefully positioned pit he had covered with branches and moss. The creature lunged again. Taman dropped and rolled. The creature's momentum carried it forward onto the covered pit. The branches snapped. The creature fell, roaring in fury, but the pit wasn't deep enough to hold it for long. Taman grabbed his sharpened stake and jumped down after it. The next 30 seconds were pure chaos. The creature thrashed and snapped. Taman stabbed blindly, aiming for anything vital. Claws raked his arms. Teeth snapped inches from his face. He drove the stake into the creature's neck once, twice, 3 times. Hot blood sprayed across his hands and face. Finally, the creature went still. Taman climbed out of the pit, gasping for air. His back burned where the claws had struck him. His arms were covered in scratches and blood, some his own and some not. He collapsed against a tree and tried to stop shaking. That was when he noticed the second presence. This one wasn't attacking. It was just watching. Taman looked up and saw a shape in the darkness, partially hidden behind a tree. Tall, reptilian, definitely Krygoth, but larger than Raskthar. The figure made no move to approach or attack. It simply observed. Then it vanished into the forest without a sound. Taimeen sat there for a long time, trying to process what had just happened. He had killed a predator. More importantly, something had watched him do it. One of the Krygoth was out there, stalking through the forest, observing the participants. He dragged himself back to his ruined shelter and started rebuilding. His wounds needed cleaning, but first he needed a safe place to rest. The night was far from over, and now he knew for certain that he wasn't alone in these woods. High above in a tree, hidden from human eyes, Varketh watched the young Terran work. The Huntmaster had observed many participants over the years, from dozens of species. Most panicked when attacked. They used their weapons or their strength or they ran. This one had done something different. The human had used the environment as a weapon. He had prepared traps before the attack came. And when the creature had struck, he hadn't frozen or fled. He had adapted. Varketh clicked his tongue thoughtfully. The boy moved like prey, careful and quiet. But he thought like a predator, setting ambushes and planning ahead. Interesting. Very interesting. The Huntmaster melted back into the shadows, following his rounds to observe other participants. But part of his attention remained on the young human, wondering what other surprises this small creature might reveal. Dawn came eventually, bringing warmth back to the forest. Taman cleaned his wounds as best he could and ate from his rations. His body ached everywhere, but he was alive. 6 more days to survive. 6 more days to prove he was more than what they thought he was. He stood up, shouldered his pack, and started walking deeper into the forest. Behind him, the dead creature lay as proof that even prey could have teeth when cornered. The glass walls of the Galactic Conclave station stretched endlessly in every direction, revealing the dark expanse of space beyond. Stars glittered like scattered diamonds against the void, and the planet Terminus Prime hung below like a green and blue jewel. Taman pressed his hand against the cold window and tried to steady his breathing. His reflection stared back at him, a thin young man with anxious eyes who looked far too small for the uniform he wore. Around him, the Grand Assembly Hall buzzed with activity. Delegates from dozens of worlds moved through the massive chamber, their voices echoing off the high ceiling. The Krygoth towered above everyone else, their reptilian scales catching the light as they walked. Each one stood at least 8 feet tall, with muscles that rippled beneath their armor. The Vithrani skittered past on multiple legs, their forearms gesturing as they spoke in rapid clicks and whistles. There were species Taman had only seen in textbooks, creatures that breathed different air and saw different colors. He was 19 years old, the youngest human ever sent to the Trials of Worth. Back on Earth, they had told him it was an honor. His teachers had praised his language skills and his diplomatic test scores. They said he would make humanity proud. But standing here now, surrounded by warriors and champions from across the galaxy, Taman felt like a child who had wandered into a den of lions. Is that really Earth's representative? A deep voice rumbled nearby. Taman didn't need to turn around to know it was a Krygoth speaking. The language translator in his ear rendered the words perfectly, but it couldn't hide the amusement in the speaker's tone. Pathetic, another voice agreed. The humans send us a hatchling. Do they not take the trials seriously? Taman kept his eyes on the window, his jaw tight. He had heard worse during the 3 days since his arrival. The whispers followed him everywhere. Some aliens laughed openly when he passed. Others simply stared, their alien faces unreadable but their body language clear enough. Even the other human delegates seemed uncomfortable around him. Ambassador Hyunwoo approached with quick, measured steps. He was in his 50s with gray at his temples and lines around his eyes that spoke of years of diplomatic service. His face was carefully neutral, but Taemin had learned to read the tension in his shoulders. Taemin, Hyunwoo said quietly, leaning close. The first trial begins tomorrow at dawn. You'll be transported to the surface with the other participants. I understand. Sir, Taemin replied, his voice barely above a whisper. Hyunwoo hesitated, then added in an even lower voice, Listen to me carefully. Survival is the only goal. Don't try to prove anything. Just survive and come back. That's all anyone expects from you. The words were meant to be reassuring, but they cut deeper than any insult. Taemin nodded without speaking. Hyunwoo squeezed his shoulder once and walked away, already turning his attention to more important delegates. The crowd in the hall suddenly parted. Taemin turned to see a massive Krigoth warrior striding toward the center of the room. His scales were darker than the others, almost black, and old scars marked his arms and chest. He wore minimal armor, just enough to satisfy the dress code, and his yellow eyes swept across the assembled delegates with the confidence of an apex predator. That's Raskthar, someone whispered nearby. Third son of the Warlord clan. He's won every combat trial for the past 3 cycles. Raskthar's gaze found Taemin across the crowd. For a moment their eyes met. Then the Krigoth's mouth split into something that might have been a smile, revealing rows of sharp teeth. He began walking toward Taemin. The crowd quieted, sensing something about to happen. Taemin's heart hammered in his chest, but he forced himself to stand still. Running would only make it worse. Raskthar stopped a few feet away, close enough that Taemin had to crane his neck back to meet his eyes. The Krigoth was more than twice his height and probably 4 times his weight. One hand could easily wrap around Taemin's entire torso. So, Raskthar said, his voice carrying across the silent hall, this is what Earth sends. Tell me, little human, do you know what the death forests of Terminus Prime contain? Taemin swallowed hard. Predators, he managed to say. And environmental hazards. Predators, Raskthar repeated, tasting the word. Yes, things with teeth and claws that hunt in the darkness. Things that can smell fear. He leaned down, bringing his face level with Taemin's. Things like me. The hall was completely silent now. Every eye was on them. The humans always talk about being warriors, Raskthar continued, straightening up. They tell stories of their wars, their history of conflict. But when I look at you, I see only prey, soft prey pretending to be a predator. Heat rushed to Taemin's face. His hands clenched into fists at his sides, but what could he do? Fighting Raskthar would be suicide. Defending himself with words would only invite more mockery. Nothing to say? Raskthar asked. Good, perhaps you are smart enough to know your place. He turned to address the crowd. I predict this one will not survive the first night. Any wagers? Laughter rippled through the hall, though some delegates looked uncomfortable. The Vethrani clicked among themselves, their translator devices rendering their words as bets and odds. Taemin stood frozen, his face burning with shame. Raskthar walked away, his tail swishing behind him. The crowd slowly returned to their conversations, but Taemin could feel their eyes on him. He was no longer just young or inexperienced. He was officially a joke, a weakling who would probably die in the forest and become a footnote in someone else's story. He returned to his quarters early that night. The room was small but functional, with a bed designed for human proportions and a window that looked out at the stars. His equipment for tomorrow's trial sat in the corner. A basic survival pack, a utility knife, a thermal blanket, and an emergency beacon. Compared to what the other species would carry, it was barely anything. Taemin sat on the edge of his bed and stared at his hands. They were small, soft, the hands of someone who had spent more time with books than weapons. His grandfather's hands had been different, rough and scarred from years of farming in the old way before automation took over. Those hands had taught Taemin how to start fires without matches, how to find water, how to read the land. You're smaller than most, his grandfather had told him once, so you'll need to be smarter. Being smart means staying alive. Taemin lay back on the bed and closed his eyes. Tomorrow the forest would test whether smart was enough. Tomorrow he would either prove himself or become another casualty in the trials. Either way, he would face it alone. He fell asleep thinking of his grandfather's weathered hands and the old lessons learned on a farm that no longer existed. In his dreams, those hands showed him how to set snares and build shelters, preparing him for a forest he had never seen on a world light years from home.